In the hurried pace of today's world, people seem to speak a great deal but listen very little. We speak to explain, to justify, to protect the self, to fill the emptiness inside, and sometimes simply out of fear of silence. But the more we speak, the more restless the mind becomes. The more we try to explain, the heavier the heart grows. There are days when we feel tired, not because we have worked too much, but because we have spoken too many unnecessary words. The Buddha, with wisdom that penetrates the nature of suffering, never instructed people to force themselves into silence. He gently pointed out that many afflictions in life originate from speech spoken without mindfulness. A word uttered while the mind is unsettled can sow seeds of misunderstanding, hurt, resentment, and those seeds may sprout long afterward, even when the speaker has forgotten they ever said those words. In the Buddha's teaching, speech is not merely sound coming from the mouth, but a direct expression of the mind. When the mind is disturbed, speech is disturbed. When the mind is agitated, speech cannot be gentle. Therefore, when we learn to speak less, we are actually learning to return and care for our inner life. Speaking less is not to appear profound, not to feel superior, and certainly not to escape life. Speaking less is to give the heart a place to rest, to allow the mind a quiet space to reflect upon itself. Perhaps each of us has experienced regret over something we said. When anger passes, when emotions settle, we suddenly realize that if we had kept silent a little longer, if we had waited for the mind to be a bit calmer, things might have been different. But life does not give us a rewind button. Words spoken are like arrows released from a bow. They cannot be recalled. We can only learn to be more cautious the next time. The Buddha taught that keeping one's speech pure is one of the paths to peace. But speech cannot be preserved through outward force. Pressing the lips together will not make the heart calm. Holding back words by force will not make afflictions disappear. The root lies in whether we have enough awareness to notice the very small movements in our minds. When the mind begins to want to speak, do we recognize it? When words are about to fall out, do we pause in time to ask ourselves if this is truly necessary? In daily life, many words are born not from wisdom, but from reflex. When the ego is touched, we speak. When misunderstood, we speak. When hurt, we speak. When compared, we speak. We speak to prove we are right, to protect our image, to avoid being looked down upon. But the more we speak like that, the larger the self becomes, and the further the mind drifts from peace. The topic, speak less to lighten the heart, keep the mind calm for a serene life, is not meant to advise withdrawal from life or becoming cold and distant. On the contrary, it is an invitation to return and live more deeply with ourselves. When we speak less, we begin to hear more, hear others more clearly, hear circumstances more clearly, and most importantly, hear the very small voice inside our own mind, the voice that has long been drowned out by too much external noise. Life is already noisy enough. Outside, there are cars, work, worries, competitions. If our inner world is noisy too, the mind has nowhere to rest. The Buddha did not promise people a life without waves, but he showed us how to keep the mind from being swept away amid life's many disturbances. One of those ways is to learn to speak less, slow down, and go deeper. When we speak less, we do not lose our value. On the contrary, our presence becomes firmer. A person with a calm inner life does not need to speak much to be heard. Simply by being present, the surrounding space naturally quiets. This is not an empty silence, but a silence with depth, nourished by mindfulness and understanding. Throughout the duration of this video, we will reflect together on the Buddha's teachings about speech, about mindful silence, and about the path of returning to keep the mind calm amid a turbulent life. Not to become someone else, but to return to ourselves lighter in heart, more serene, and less burdened by suffering, little by little. At this very moment, if you are listening, allow yourself to breathe a bit more slowly. Let go of the thoughts rushing through your head. and simply be present with each word spoken. Perhaps, from this moment of settling, a small seed of peace has been planted in your heart. In the Buddha's teaching, every suffering has a cause, and every cause can be recognized if one stops and looks deeply. Suffering does not arise by itself, nor is it fate. Suffering often starts quietly, from small thoughts, habitual reactions, and especially from speech spoken without awareness. Some people spend their whole lives without harming others by action, yet so much suffering by words alone. And some people make themselves exhausted and heavy, not because circumstances are harsh, but because they have spent a day saying too many unnecessary things. People often do not realize that talking a lot is a major drain on mental energy. Every word arises from a certain state of mind. When the mind is calm, speech will be calm. When the mind is stirred, speech carries that disturbance. But most of the time, we speak unconsciously. We speak out of habit, out of reflex, to respond, to protect ourselves, to affirm the self. And those words, though they may sound ordinary, quietly make our minds more confused. In daily life, it is rare that someone pauses before speaking to sincerely ask, "Is this truly necessary?" We usually ask, "Will saying this benefit me?" Or, "If I do not speak, will I be disadvantaged?" This way of asking turns speech into a tool of the ego rather than a means of understanding and love. When speech arises from the ego, no matter how eloquent, the speaker's mind cannot be light. The Buddha taught that among the 4 types of karma, body, speech, and mind, verbal karma is the easiest to create, but also the hardest to maintain clean. Because speaking is too easy, but speaking rightly, kindly, and mindfully is very difficult. Just one moment of unawareness, a sentence uttered in anger, jealousy, or competition, is enough to create deep wounds in others and to carve a heavy mark in one's own heart. When we speak a lot, the mind often does not get a chance to rest. Words follow words, thoughts follow thoughts, emotions follow emotions. The mind is like water constantly stirred, never settling. And when the surface is not still, we cannot clearly see. We cannot clearly see what we think, what we feel, what we want. We only see a chaotic stream carrying us away, and the more we try to speak clearly, the more entangled it becomes. There are people who, after a long argument and after saying everything they thought, feel emptier and more tired than before. They thought speaking would lighten their hearts, but in fact it did not. Because speaking without mindfulness only projects the disorder within oneself outward, and then brings back even more disorder. Words not illuminated by awareness do not relieve suffering, they only spread it. In Buddhist teaching, there are 4 types of speech considered unwholesome, often called the 4 kinds of harmful speech: lying, divisive speech, saying things with 2 tongues, harsh speech, and idle chatter. But even when one does not fall completely into these 4 categories, many everyday utterances still burden the mind. These are excessive complaints, repetitive telling of one's suffering, judgments of others, comparisons, and gossip about matters unrelated to oneself. These words seem harmless, but they quietly nourish affliction in the heart. When we get used to speaking much, our minds grow accustomed to agitation. When we get used to reacting with words, we find silence unbearable. Silence becomes a frightening void, because in silence we must confront ourselves directly. We must face unresolved emotions, hidden anxieties, unmet desires. Because we are not used to facing them, we choose to keep talking, to keep telling, to keep explaining, so we do not have to look within. But the Buddha teaches that suffering cannot be resolved if one does not dare to look straight at one's own mind. And to see the mind, one must first create stillness. Speaking less is one way to create that stillness. When we do not rush to speak, we have the opportunity to observe the emotions arising. We can notice anger beginning to emerge, sadness rising, or wounded pride quietly operating. Just by seeing, the mind begins to have the light of awareness. Speaking less is not repression. Speaking less is a conscious choice. When the mind is still restless, words usually carry turmoil. When the mind is not calm, even correct words can hurt others. A practitioner does not rush to speak, not because they have nothing to say, but because they understand that speaking while the mind is unsettled cannot bring lasting benefit. There is a simple truth often forgotten. Many things in life do not need to be said to still exist. Respect does not necessarily have to be affirmed by words. Love does not necessarily have to be proven through argument. A person's value is not found in the number of words they speak, but in the depth of their presence. The one who speaks little yet lives mindfully often creates a sense of calm for those around them. Conversely, the one who speaks much yet is unsettled often makes the space heavy. In practice, one realizes that each time they speak a little less, the mind becomes a little lighter, not because we lose something, but because we no longer carry the echoes of useless words, replaying whether we spoke correctly, worrying whether we offended someone, fearing being misunderstood. When speech is restrained, the mind also has less to bear. The Buddha once taught that true speech must meet 4 conditions. It must be truthful, beneficial, timely, and spoken with a heart of goodwill. If any one of these 4 is missing, it is best to remain silent. But in daily life, we seldom check all 4 before we speak. We often speak truthfully but with anger. We say something beneficial but not at the right time. We speak at the right time, but it may not be truly necessary. This lack of completeness turns words into burdens for both speaker and listener. When we practice speaking less, we do not become cold or distant. On the contrary, we become more subtle. We begin to listen more, not only with the ears, but with the heart. We hear what is unsaid, the emotions behind another's words, and it is this listening that forms the basis of true understanding and love. Lightness of heart does not come from saying everything, but from letting go. Letting go of unnecessary words, letting go of the need to prove, letting go of reactive habits. When we speak less, we no longer have to protect our image with words, no longer need to argue to win. The mind then has a chance to return to its natural, simple, and peaceful state. Thus, speaking less is not an external technique, but an expression of an inner life being cared for. As the mind gradually settles, speech naturally thins out. No need to force, to strain, or to posture. Just each day, be mindful enough to omit one unnecessary word. The path to lightness begins to open right in our everyday life. That path does not require us to abandon family, work, or social relationships. It only invites us to change one very small but very deep thing: how we use our words. When we become aware that every word leaves a mark on the mind, we naturally become more cautious, not out of fear of being wrong, but out of understanding of consequences. Like someone who has once been burned, they do not need to be reminded to stay away from fire. In everyday life, many words are uttered simply to satisfy transient emotions. When joyful, we speak for pleasure. When sad, we speak to lessen the pain. When angry, we speak to vent. But emotions are impermanent, while the consequences of words can last a very long time. A sentence said in anger can break a relationship that took years to build. A careless remark can become an obsession in another person's heart for life. And those words, replayed in memory, prevent the speaker from truly finding peace. The Buddha saw this clearly, so he always emphasized mindfulness in every utterance. He did not require people to speak lofty words, only to speak words that do not cause more suffering. But to do that, one must first see that most of the words we speak are not necessary. They are spoken because we cannot bear the emptiness inside. Unaccustomed to being alone with the mind, people use speech to fill that void. Therefore, speaking less is an opportunity to become familiar again with that emptiness. At first, we may feel uncomfortable, as if something is missing. But if we are patient and stay with that feeling, we will realize the emptiness is not as frightening as we imagined. On the contrary, In that space, the mind has room to adjust and heal itself. When we speak less, we will notice that many problems do not need to be solved by words. Some misunderstandings will naturally dissipate when not fueled by further argument. Some conflicts will settle when no one insists on proving themselves right. Some sorrows will lighten when we stop retelling them. Then we will see that mindful silence has far more power than speech without mindfulness. In reality, those who speak little are often misunderstood as cold or distant. But practitioners understand that speaking less is not indifference, but a deeper kind of care. Instead of hastily replying, they choose to listen. Instead of hastily judging, they choose to observe. And instead of speaking to discharge personal emotion, they choose not to let their mind harm others. There is a major difference between not speaking and not needing to speak. One who does not speak because of repression still carries turmoil inside. One who does not need to speak because of understanding naturally feels calm. Speaking less in the spirit of the Buddha is not endurance, but the result of comprehension. When we understand that more words do not clarify issues, we stop naturally. Gradually, as we practice speaking less, we will realize something important. Lightness of heart does not come from others understanding us, but from our understanding ourselves. When we stop trying to explain, justify, or vindicate ourselves, we are freed from the pressure of recognition. The mind becomes freer, no longer bound by others' gaze and judgment. Speaking less also saves much energy. That energy is no longer scattered on useless conversations, repetitive complaints, endless debates. Instead, it is returned to nourish mindfulness, peace, and clarity within. And when the inner life is nourished, the outer life naturally becomes more harmonious. Those who learn to speak less will begin to notice subtle changes within themselves. They are less tired after gatherings. They regret fewer things they have said. They get less swept up in gossip and comparison. Most importantly, they feel a real lightness in the heart, not because circumstances have changed, but because their way of facing them has changed. Thus, speaking less is not the final goal, but the first door to keeping the mind calm. When we understand why speaking more exhausts the mind, we no longer see speaking less as loss, but as a gift to ourselves, a gift of peace, clarity, and a gentler life in a turbulent world. From that foundation we go deeper to understand. Speaking less is truly meaningful only when accompanied by inner transformation, when speech settles to give way to wisdom and compassion. That is the path the Buddha pointed out, the path from the noise of words back to the silence of the mind. In Buddhist teaching, verbal karma is one of the easiest to create, yet leaves the most profound and lasting consequences. A bodily action often requires time, conditions, and circumstances. A thought in the mind can sometimes pass and vanish. But speech is different. Speech is both action and direct expression of the mind, and it spreads quickly. A single utterance can travel far beyond the speaker's control, leaving marks in many hearts, including the speaker's own. The Buddha taught that keeping speech pure brings natural peace to the mind. Speech is the flow, connecting the mind with the external world. When the mind is unsettled, speech cannot be gentle. And when speech repeatedly creates karma, the mind also struggles to be at ease. These two support and affect each other moment by moment in everyone's life. Verbal karma is not only lying or speaking harshly. Many people think that as long as they avoid severe insults, they have kept their speech pure. But in the spirit of the Dharma, verbal karma is subtler. Speech that judges, compares, laments, complains, speaks to vent anger, or speaks to prove oneself right. All these are refined forms of verbal karma that quietly erode peace in the mind. Some people may not say anything vicious all day, yet their minds are heavy and tired. Why? Because they have spoken too many unnecessary words. They retell their suffering again and again. They bring up others' faults in apparently harmless conversations. They gossip about other people's lives without relevance. These words may not immediately wound anyone, but they nourish unwholesome threads like envy, resentment, and dissatisfaction, preventing the mind from settling. The Buddha pointed out 4 types of speech to avoid: lying, divisive speech, harsh speech, and idle chatter. But if we look deeper, we see that the root of these 4 arises from an undisciplined mind. When the mind is greedy, we may lie to get what we want. When angry, we may speak harshly to hurt. When deluded, we chatter aimlessly to fill the void inside. Keeping speech pure is not an external moral form, but a deep inner practice. It requires the practitioner to observe their mind before, during, and after speaking. Before speaking, do we have enough awareness to recognize our motivation? While speaking, are we being led by emotion? After speaking, does the mind feel lighter or heavier? Simply asking these questions regularly is already stepping onto the path of conserving speech. Many have the habit of speaking to relieve themselves. When sad, they talk. When frustrated, they speak. When wronged, they explain. They believe speaking will lighten the heart. But speaking while the mind is disturbed only reinforces that disturbance. Each time we recount our suffering, it gets watered. Each time we recall a wound, the wound deepens. That is why some people speak much of their suffering, yet never lighten. They even grow heavier. The Buddha did not teach people to repress emotions. He taught them to transform emotions with mindfulness and wisdom. Instead of speaking to vent, the practitioner learns to look directly at the emotion. They identify anger as anger, sadness as sadness, without assimilating to them or letting them direct speech. When an emotion is seen and held with awareness, it gradually calms. And when emotions calm, speech naturally becomes gentler. Keeping speech pure is also safeguarding relationships. Many relationships collapse not from lack of love, but from excess of unmindful speech. People love one another, but speak with accusatory tones, criticism, and competition. Each word is like a small needle pricking the other day after day. Eventually, even without the last prick, the wound won't heal. One who keeps speech pure is not someone who always utters pretty words, but someone who knows when to speak and when to be silent. Sometimes a timely silence is worth more than 1,000 explanations. Sometimes not speaking is an act of compassion, because when we see that our words will not help and may even hurt, silence is the wisest choice. In daily life, many conflicts ignite because people do not pause one beat before speaking. Just slow down a little, take a deep breath, observe the emotion swelling, and you can avoid much unnecessary verbal karma. The Buddha taught that conquering oneself is greater than conquering 10,000 enemies. In many cases, winning over oneself means restraining the mouth that wants to speak in anger. Keeping speech pure also helps the mind become clear. When no longer entangled in gossip and slander, the mind has more space to rest in the present. Those who refrain from useless talk have more time to observe, to listen, and to understand life more deeply. From that understanding, compassion naturally grows. A subtle truth practitioners gradually discover. Each time verbal conduct is maintained, the mind feels lighter, even if outer conditions remain unchanged. Not because others treat them better, but because they are no longer making themselves suffer with words. When you no longer have to replay whether you said something inappropriate, no longer fear being misunderstood, no longer torment yourself over words spoken, the mind becomes significantly more at ease. Keeping speech pure is also a practice of humility. When we speak less, we stop placing ourselves at the center. We no longer feel the need to have an opinion on everything or to prove that we know more. This humility softens the mind, making it receptive and teachable, and a soft mind is harder to wound. In the Dharma, peace is not the absence of problems, but the state of not being overly shaken by them. A person who keeps speech pure is not someone who has never suffered, but someone who does not allow suffering to dictate their speech. They may be sad or in pain, but they do not use words to sow more suffering for themselves or others. Gradually, as speech is kept pure, we see clearly the relationship between words and inner peace. Each mindful word sown is a wholesome seed. Each timely silence is a step toward liberation. And every day, simply by omitting one unnecessary utterance, we are nurturing genuine peace in our lives. Keeping speech pure, therefore, is not a dry rule but a practical method for living lightly in a heavy world. When words quiet down, the mind has the opportunity to return to its inherent stillness. And in that stillness, one truly touches serenity, not because everything is perfect, but because the mind is no longer swept away by too many external noises. In the Buddha's teaching, nothing happens randomly. Every utterance has a root, and that root is not outside circumstances or the other person, but within the speaker's own mind. If we do not turn to look at the mind, we will endlessly adjust our outward speech without achieving real inner stability. Words are the tip, the mind is the root. As long as the root moves, the tip cannot be still. Many try to learn how to speak well, gracefully, and rightly. They read books, listen to lectures, memorize what to say and what not to say. Yet in moments of heightened emotion, what they have learned seems to disappear. Old habits reappear. Words come out by reflex, following old waves of feeling. This shows that merely fixing speech without transforming the mind only changes the surface and will not last. The Buddha taught that the mind leads all phenomena. As the mind thinks, speech follows. When the mind is governed by greed, hatred, and delusion, even flowery words carry uneasy energy. Conversely, when the mind is calm, even simple, sparse words can bring comfort and ease to the listener. Therefore, to transform speech, the only path is to turn and look deeply into the mind. Turning to look at the mind is not easy, because we have long been used to looking outward at others' faults, at circumstances, at gossip, at comparisons, at right and wrong. Rarely do we stop to see what is in our own hearts. We seldom ask, why do I want to say this? Why can't I bear silence? Why does a single comment from someone provoke such a strong reaction in me? When we begin to return and look at the mind, we gradually realize that many of our words do not arise from wisdom, but from ununderstood emotions. Sometimes it is fear of being belittled, sometimes wounded pride, sometimes a desire to be recognized, heard, or noticed. Sometimes it is the habit of speaking to ease the feeling of emptiness, not even knowing clearly what that emptiness is. In the course of practice, an important truth emerges. Speech does not arise by itself. Before speech, there is always a thought. Before the thought, there is an emotion. And before the emotion, there is a state of mind. If we do not see this chain, we will be led by words without understanding why we speak. But when we begin to observe, with a little awareness, we clearly notice a very small movement in the mind before the mouth opens. It may be a wave of irritation, a bit of annoyance, a sense of dissatisfaction, or a thought to retort. If we catch that movement in time, speech will no longer be explosive. We can pause, we can breathe, we can choose not to speak or to speak differently. That pause is where wisdom begins to appear. The Buddha did not teach people to annihilate emotions. He taught to recognize and understand them. When we don't understand our emotions, they control us. When we understand them, emotions are no longer enemies, but objects for contemplation. Returning to look at the mind is learning to sit with what is in our hearts, without rushing to react or judge. In everyday life, many people live with a constantly taut mind. Work, family, responsibilities, expectations, all create an invisible pressure. When the mind is tense, even a small external trigger can make speech sharp, rough, or vicious. If we do not see that the root lies in inner tension, we will blame circumstances or others and continue to create verbal karma. Turning to look at the mind helps us see clearly. The one who causes our suffering is not the person opposite us, but the untransformed reactions within ourselves. When we understand this, our attitude towards speech changes significantly. We no longer see words as weapons to defend ourselves, but as tools to be used with care and compassion. There are times when we speak a lot, yet feel empty afterward. There are times when we speak little, yet feel unusually light. The difference is not the number of words, but the state of the mind when speaking. When the mind is unsettled, speaking much or little does not bring peace. But when the mind is settled, one sentence suffices, or even without words, the mind is at ease. Those who return to look at the mind gradually realize that not every remark needs a response. Not every question needs an answer. Not every provocation needs a reply. When the mind is steady, many words can pass by without leaving a trace. This is not indifference, but the fruit of deep understanding of impermanence and dependent origination. The Buddha taught that all phenomena arise and pass away. Another's words are also phenomena that arise and cease. If we hastily grasp and react, we bind ourselves to that arising and passing. But if we see them with mindfulness, we will recognize that they come and go. Nothing need be held or fought. With such understanding, the heart naturally lightens and our speech becomes more sparse. Turning to look at the mind also helps us recognize repetitive patterns in how we speak. Some always speak defensively. Some always speak to prove they are right. Some always speak in reproach. Some always speak with self-deprecation. When we see those patterns, we no longer identify with them. We understand they are mere habitual psychologies, not our essential nature. When we cease identifying, those patterns lose their power. In this practice, silence plays an important role. But it is not rigid silence, it is mindful silence. Silence to hear what the mind is saying. Silence to discover the inner noises. Silence to see that often those noises are the source of suffering, not the outside world. If we dare to turn and look at the mind, we will find it is not always beautiful or kind. There are dark, weak, and selfish corners. But the Buddha does not tell us to hate or hide these aspects. He teaches us to see them, understand them, and transform them with mindfulness and compassion. When we no longer fear looking into our minds, we no longer need to speak excessively to hide or protect ourselves. Gradually, as turning to look at the mind becomes a habit, our speech will naturally change, not because we force ourselves to speak less, but because there are fewer inner pressures driving us to speak. When the mind no longer carries much anxiety or craving for recognition, words become simple, sincere, and deeper. And at some point, we will realize, inner stillness does not depend on whether the outside is noisy, but on whether the inside is being swayed. Those who keep their minds calm can live amid turmoil without being swept away. And when one has such a steady mind, even few words carry wholesome energy, making others feel comfortable in their presence. Turning to look at the mind, therefore, is not an accessory step, but the core step on the path of speaking less to lighten the heart. When the root is cared for, the tip naturally rests. When the mind has settled, speech naturally softens. And when speech is gentle, life gradually becomes more serene, just as the Buddha taught more than 2,000 years ago. When people begin to practice speaking less, the first thing they often notice is not peace, but noise. A noise different from external noise, one that arises from within the mind itself. Because until now, speech has inadvertently acted as a covering layer, allowing us not to face these inner sounds. When speech stops, what was hidden begins to show. There, the path back to true stillness begins. Many people think stillness means silence, but in the spirit of the Dharma, stillness does not mean absolute quiet. Stillness is when the mind is not dragged about by endless thoughts and habitual reactions. Outside, there may still be voices, vehicles, and life, but inside, we are not overly disturbed. To touch that stillness, one must learn to speak less, not only with the mouth, but with the mind. Speaking less is the necessary condition to begin listening. When we speak a lot, we cannot listen. When we always prepare a reply in our heads, we do not truly hear others nor ourselves. Listening requires a certain emptiness, empty enough to receive, to feel, to see clearly. This emptiness frightens many people. They fear that if they do not speak, do not react, do not stay busy, they will have to face unresolved feelings. The Buddha taught that stillness is not something to be sought far away. It already exists within each person, but is covered by many discursive thoughts. Those thoughts are not random. They are nourished daily by habitual thinking, speaking, and reacting. When we speak too much, we feed the stream of discursive thought. When we speak less, that stream weakens and stillness has a chance to open. A subtle discovery of practice is this. When we speak less, we begin to hear things we never heard before. The rhythm of our own breath, small vibrations in the body, emotions arising in the heart. More importantly, we hear the fatigue, tension, and unease we had neglected or deliberately tried to cover over with words. In daily life, people often use speech to escape sadness with endless chatter, escape emptiness with aimless stories, escape themselves by staying busy with back and forth talk. But escape does not make sadness disappear. It only temporarily dampens it, which returns stronger when we can no longer keep talking. Therefore, speaking less is not loss, but a return. Return to a slower rhythm, to deeper listening, to oneself, the self that has not sat quietly with its inner life for too long. Allowing ourselves to speak less is allowing ourselves to stop running. And when we stop running, we have the chance to see what we are carrying. Inner stillness is not always comfortable. When we begin to listen, old memories may arise, unresolved pains surface, questions without answers echo. But the Buddha taught that no transformation occurs if we do not dare to face them. Stillness is not avoidance, it is non-avoidance. It allows things to be present exactly as they are, not covered by words or reactions. Those who practice speaking less gradually understand that not everything needs to be shared in words. Some feelings need to be felt, not told. Some grief needs to be held in silence, not dissected. Some problems can only be solved when the mind is calm, not by arguing and reasoning. When we speak less, we also create fewer ripples in relationships. Many conflicts do not stem from malice, but from both sides talking too much, too fast, too hastily. When one person stops, listens, and keeps silence at the right time, the space between them changes. Tension decreases. Opportunities for understanding increase. Sometimes, simply not adding more words makes everything naturally settle. Inner stillness also helps us recognize what truly matters. When we are no longer swept up in trivialities, we begin to see deeper values. We discern what is worth speaking and what can be left. This subtle discrimination makes life lighter and more meaningful. The Buddha said that the wise do not speak much, but each word they say carries weight. That weight does not come from mere knowledge, but from inner stillness. When the mind grows used to dwelling in stillness, speech ripens neither hurried nor sharp. Listeners feel that peacefulness, even if the speaker makes no effort to convey it. There is a beautiful paradox in this practice. When we stop seeking stillness, stillness appears. When we no longer try to force the mind to be quiet by effort, the mind quiets naturally. One way to let go of striving is to speak less, to interfere less with the mind's natural flow, and to stop reacting in habitual ways. Speaking less to hear inner stillness is not a goal to be achieved once and for all, but a process to be nurtured. Each day, if we are mindful enough to let pass one unnecessary word and give a bit more space to silence, we are moving in the right direction. No need for perfection, no need for coercion, only sincerity with ourselves. Gradually, we'll find that stillness is no longer foreign. It becomes a refuge. When tired, we know how to return to it. When confused, we can stop in that stillness. And when life is noisy, we know inside that there is a space not easily shaken. Within that space, life becomes more serene. Not because life has become easier, but because the mind is no longer carried away so much. Speaking less does not impoverish life, it deepens it. And when life deepens, stillness no longer needs seeking. It naturally appears in each breath, each step, each fully present moment. Keeping the mind calm while sitting alone in a quiet room is precious. But maintaining calm amid a turbulent life is the profound practice the Buddha wants to teach, because the path is not found in seclusion, but right within everyday life, where we face work, family, responsibilities, relationships, and countless unwelcome situations. Keeping the mind calm does not mean making life peaceful. It means not letting the mind be dragged by unnecessary disturbances. Many mistakenly think that to be at peace, they must withdraw from life, avoid people, and avoid trouble. But the Buddha does not teach that. He teaches to live among life's affairs without letting them pull the mind away. Storms still come, words still arise, events still happen, but the practiced mind no longer reacts in habitual ways. This is not indifference, but awareness. In daily life, what disturbs people most is not events, but how we react to them. In the same situation, one person feels burdened while another feels light. The difference is internal, not external. When the mind chases after others' words, praise and blame, right and wrong, the mind is always stretched. But when we learn to turn back, speak less, and react less, no matter how turbulent life is, the mind still has a firm footing. Keeping the mind calm amid life's movement begins with learning not to react immediately. Much of life's suffering comes not from reacting, but from reacting too quickly, so quickly that we don't understand what is happening inside us. A single displeasing word or look can provoke an immediate replying with speech, attitude, or emotion. Such haste unbalances the mind. The Buddha taught that between stimulus and response, there is always a space. In that space, there is freedom. If we can stop in that space, take a breath, and recognize what is happening, we will no longer be entirely swayed by circumstances. Keeping the mind calm does not mean being emotionless, but not letting emotion dictate our words and actions. In the family, many tensions arise not from a lack of love, but from a lack of stillness. People speak too much, too fast, too emotionally. A single remark in fatigue can ignite a major conflict. But if just one person knows how to pause, hold silence appropriately, and allow emotions to settle, much harm can be prevented. Keeping the mind calm in the family is not suppression, but choosing peace over winning. The same applies at work. Pressure, competition, and comparison are unavoidable. But if we let our minds be driven by them, we quickly become exhausted. The person who keeps the mind calm is not someone who doesn't care about results, but someone who does not let outcomes define their worth. They work wholeheartedly without losing inner stability because of a criticism or a temporary failure. They know work is part of life, not their whole self. Keeping the mind calm amid life's movement also means learning to choose what enters the mind. In this age, people are exposed to too much information, too many opinions, too much noise. Without selection, the mind becomes a repository of needless anxieties and fears. Speaking less also implies receiving less of what disturbs the mind. Not everything is necessary to know, not every opinion needs attention. The Buddha said, "The mind is like soil. The seed sown most will sprout strongly." If we sow the mind with complaints, blame, and dissatisfaction, we cannot expect peace. But if we stop and return to nurture wholesome seeds, mindfulness, compassion, and understanding, then even amid turmoil, the mind has a firm foundation. An important element in keeping the mind calm is accepting impermanence. When we accept that everything changes and nothing remains on our terms, we resist less. Many words and strong reactions originate from not accepting reality. We want things to go our way. When they don't, we become angry, complain, and resent. But understanding impermanence teaches us that things come and go and are not worth clinging to. Keeping the mind calm does not mean not speaking. It means speaking when needed, and staying silent when silence is appropriate. Sometimes one must speak up to defend what is right or prevent harm. But often, silence is the wisest choice. The calm-minded person discerns between these. They do not remain silent out of fear, nor speak impulsively. They act from inner clarity. Gradually, in practicing to keep the mind calm, we will notice life's externals sway us less. We still live, work, and relate, but we are not swept away. We gain the capacity to stand still within ourselves, despite surrounding turbulence. From that stillness we live more serenely and lightly, not because life has become easier, but because the mind no longer fights against life. Keeping the mind calm amid life's motion is a long journey, not a quick achievement. There will be times we forget, react, or say things we shouldn't. But what matters is not never being wrong, but returning each time we recognize we have gone astray. Each return strengthens the path of awareness. And then, one day, we will realize that serenity is no longer distant. It manifests in the way we speak, the way we keep silent, the way we breathe, and the way we face life. Speaking less does not deprive us. It helps us keep many precious things, peace, clarity, and inner steadiness amid life's constant movement. As we reach the end of this reflection, perhaps each of us has recognized something simple yet profound. Much of the heaviness in life does not come from circumstances, but from how we react to them. In those reactions, speech plays a crucial role. Just by omitting one unmindful word, the heart can be much lighter. Just by pausing before speaking, the mind gains space to breathe. The Buddha does not teach people to become mute, nor to close themselves off from the world. He merely points out that speech should be grounded in mindfulness, understanding, and compassion. When words no longer spring from a hurried ego, anger, unease, or the need to prove, speech naturally becomes gentle. And when speech is gentle, the speaker's mind also becomes gentle. Speaking less, to lighten the heart, is not a skill for certain situations, but a way of living to be cultivated each day. Some days we do well, some days we forget, react, and speak more than necessary. What matters is not never erring, but knowing how to return to the breath, to awareness, to the original intention of living lightly and peacefully. Living serenely is not living in a world without problems. Serenity is the ability to stay still within oneself, even when life remains turbulent. The serene person is not someone who never feels sadness, anger, or worry, but someone who does not let those states drag them too far. They know when to stop, when to stay silent, and when to speak with real necessity and benefit. When we learn to speak less, we are also learning to honor silence. Silence is not meaningless emptiness, but the ground where wisdom arises. In silence, we see more clearly what is happening in our minds. In silence, we realize many things that once troubled us are not so important. In silence, we begin to live more slowly, deeply, and truthfully with ourselves. Perhaps tomorrow life will be the same work, still busy, responsibilities still there, people around sometimes pleasant and sometimes difficult. But if from today we carry a gentle reminder, speak a little less, many things can change. Change not because others are different, but because we have changed how we relate. Each time you are about to speak, try pausing a beat. No need to overthink. Just ask yourself a simple question. Is this truly necessary? If not, let it pass. Silence then is not loss but self-protection of your peace. And each such moment is sowing a wholesome seed. That seed may not sprout immediately, but over time, watered by steady practice, it will grow into inner stability. Then you will no longer have to force yourself to speak less. Speech will naturally thin out, not because there is nothing to say, but because the heart is full. When the heart is full, there is no need to speak constantly to fill it. Living serenely is not give up or neglect. It is living responsibly without being burdened. It is doing one's best without losing oneself. It is speaking when necessary, keeping silence when appropriate, and always leaving a place for return in the mind. That place is not far away. It is in mindful breath, in the awakened awareness of each present moment. If during this time of listening, some passage made your heart soften, felt like a reminder or a reflection, then perhaps the Dharma has touched you in its own way. You do not need to understand everything or remember everything. Just carry one small practice and cultivate it daily. That is enough. You might begin by speaking less when it is unnecessary. Step back from conversations that stir the heart. Refrain from reacting while emotions are still unsettled. Instead, give more time to silence, to breath, to listening to yourself. Each small step is a step on the path of serenity. Before closing, please take a very short moment to breathe in slowly and breathe out deeply. Do not think of anything more. Just know that right now you are here, listening and allowing yourself to rest in stillness. That alone is a precious gift to yourself. If you feel the value of these moments of quiet, and you wish each day to have a little more peace, a little more lightness, a little more understanding to live in a restless world, consider this a gentle invitation. You may continue to accompany the Zen Light Wisdom channel, where we return together to the Buddha's simple yet profound teachings to cultivate inner peace day by day. If it resonates, you may subscribe to the channel so you don't miss future content. Not to accumulate knowledge, but to have more pauses amid a busy life. You may also share this video with someone you think may need a moment to slow down and lighten their heart, as a quiet sowing of wholesome connection. Thank you for your time listening to the very end. May you, in the days ahead, keep an inner stillness despite life's movements. Speak less to lighten the heart. Keep the mind calm, so each step in life is more serene, clearer, and more peaceful. If these moments have helped your heart settle and feel a little lighter, then perhaps the Dharma has quietly touched you in its own way. Peace does not come from elsewhere, but from the moments we stop, listen, and return to ourselves. If you wish each day to have more moments of quiet, to reflect the inner mind, and live more slowly amid life's bustle, you may follow Zen Light Wisdom. Here, we do not seek the lofty, but simply return together to the Buddha's simple teachings to nourish inner steadiness. You may also share this video with those you love as a way to plant a gentle seed of goodwill. Perhaps just when they need to pause, these words will help lighten their hearts. Thank you for being present and listening to the end. May you keep the quiet in your heart, speak less to lighten the heart, and walk through life serenely.